Hi, in this podcast, what I really want to focus on, believe it or not, it's not just simply the roots of psychology, but is a term called empiricism, which I believe appears on page 3 of your textbook. But it's a pretty important term, not just for this class, but for your future education, because it's a term that's going to come up and people are going to assume you know what it means. It is connected to the roots of psychology, because remember, psychology really emerges as a distinct science with Wilhelm Wundt, right, doing his lab work. But it emerges from different fields. Wundt's actually a philosopher, and there are a lot of what we call physiologists, people who study the biology of the body, and who are the early psychologists, so to speak. So psychology emerges from this field of diverse disciplines, some that were scientific, some that were considered non-scientific by today's standards. Okay? So I want you to think about this. Psychology, even to this day, kind of has this chip on its shoulder because it's technically a social science, even though it is rooted in a lot of biology. So it always has this kind of feeling like it's trying to tell the people in chemistry, the physics, the biologists, hey, we're a real science too. All right, when you think about science, I want you to think about what science needs is a method. It needs a method that is going to not so much guarantee, but give us the best chance at producing knowledge that is accurate for whatever phenomenon we're studying, right? So empiricism is about a method that produces knowledge. So empiricism is about knowledge production. Empiricism is about knowledge production. The earliest empiricists were philosophers, okay? John Locke is an empiricist. The tabula rasa guy. Yeah, right? He's an empiricist. So let's take a look at what it actually means. Okay. Remember I told you empiricism, a way to understand it, is about knowledge production. Ask yourself, are there better ways? Are there more efficient ways to produce knowledge that is accurate? Most people say, at least in the West, yes, right? And basically science is looking for this methodology. And it looks to, very early on, to empiricism. This is what empiricism is. It's basically the belief that knowledge, right, originates in our experience and our sensory observation of the world. That's why Locke says we're tabula rasa, meaning we're born a blank slate. We're not born with knowledge. Now, this is really key. By saying that, Locke is actually having a conversation with people like Plato, Descartes, people in your book, Socrates. All philosophers who, to one extent or another, believed that we were born with a certain amount of knowledge. So for Plato, the goal is to actually remember, so to speak, to remember that which you have forgotten, that we're born with ideas like the good, the moral, etc. You don't need to know all those details, but you just need to know that Locke is having a conversation with other people when he says this, right? So science builds itself on empiricism. Empiricism is the groundwork, not the only one, for the scientific method. Right? Because empiricism in and of itself starts off in philosophy. It says this, but it gives rise to science because it insists upon, wait a minute, we have to make observations of the world. We have to make them systematic. We have to analyze our data, starting to sound like part of the scientific methodology we currently use in, say, the experiment. So empiricism gives rise to science because it's basically the methodology. It's the early method, right, or the early opinion about how to best produce knowledge that science uses. That's why psychology becomes a science, because it embraces empiricism, which is simply a way of producing knowledge. Okay? And it leads to it gets bigger than itself, right? It leads to systematic observations and analysis of data and experiments. Okay, so it is extremely, extremely important that you understand empiricism's role in science emerging and psychology emerging as a science. Okay, again, let's just repeat, it's ultimately it's a claim about the best way to produce knowledge. And those ways it claims to produce knowledge are what scientists, for the most part, use.